Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. We've got a great show for you tonight. Welcome to Windows on the Welcome to the show. We've got a great one for you tonight. Really interesting stuff to share with you. I'd like to say hello to our international audience because we're gaining more and more global viewers every week. So here's to this kind of globalism. Yes, our global local audience is growing. Now, tonight we're going to talk about many things, but in particular, the return of the hunger stones. If that sounds enigmatic, well, it is, but it's true, and they have returned. Now, the problem with so-called trusted sources is also something we're going to be talking about. Now, when our trusted sources have become Wikipedia, Snopes, and George Soros, who are in effect doing the fact-checking, well, maybe we should be looking at other narratives. So this week, we're going to look at what is behind the lies, sort of a thing we do every week, as facts are few and far between in our post-truth world. Even where we came from, actually, and the so-called Big Bang. These are all things that are tailored to our dumbed-down minds. Dumbed down because of the education. Because education primes the mind merely for the propaganda to come. It comes specially tailored to the target audience. And we've covered this. The actual principle of education is to prevent change in the individual. And of course, now we've got a global system of education through UNESCO, United Nations, which is putting theories into the minds of children. And those children are now becoming dictators, such as Greta Thunberg. But just where the present species of Homo sapiens started is also a kids' show of archaeologists looking to back up this out of Africa theory. I was looking at this today, which has been disputed, this out of Africa theory. It's not only been disputed, but it has actually been debunked by, guess whom? The people who actually proposed the theory in the first place. But it doesn't stop our media from trotting out the same thing over and over again, just like they do with climate change. And that's where it's all going to hook up tonight. But the same old story, though, is trotted out time and time again. A fine example of how stories circulated to the public, circulated by people like the Rockefeller Foundation and the New Global Community through the UN, are tailored to the intelligence level they have created in schools. And that's really, really important. Now, I'm just going to bring this up. It's a recent story in Nature. This magazine, it waffled on about a new skull fragment that had been found in Greece, which actually wasn't found recently. I think it was found in the 70s. And it has been made to fit this out of Africa theory. Now, this really is going to tie into the whole climate change theory and everything else we're going to talk about tonight. It says here, 2 fossilized human crania, known as Apidema 1 and Apidema 2, from the Apidema cave in southern Greece, were discovered in the late 70s, but have remained enigmatic owing to their incomplete nature, tophonic distortion, and lack of archaeological context and chronology. So let's look at that. Lack of archaeological context and chronology. So what they've done now is they've made it fit their own archaeological record. Since then, a whole lot more evidence has passed the academics because basically academics are the most easily fooled species on the planet. Now, they listen to what they are told and repeat it. They also have to assume authority even when they don't know what they're talking about. And this is a major thing with academia. And of course, people listen to academics, don't they? But academics are the most prone to propaganda. And we brought this up in our show a few weeks ago, where we covered a book called Propaganda by Jacques Ellul, which was written in the early 1970s. And it was investigating which people in society are most susceptible to propaganda and how propaganda actually works. So carrying on with this, it says the Apidema 2 dates to more than 170,000 years ago and has a Neanderthal-like morphological pattern. Well, Neanderthal-like doesn't mean it's Neanderthal. By contrast, Apidema 1 dates to more than 210,000 years ago and presents a mixture of modern human and primitive features. These results suggest that two late Middle Pleistocene human groups were present at this site, an early Homo sapiens population followed by a Neanderthal population. Well, all that they're saying here is what they've been told. They don't know any of this. It says our findings support multiple dispersals of early modern humans out of Africa because that's what they were looking for, and highlights the complex demographic processes that characterized Pleistocene human evolution and modern human presence in Southeast Europe. So that's all right. It all fits their narrative now, doesn't it? Now, despite the out of Africa theory being completely debunked, they still push it. But if you look at the out of Africa theory debunked, you will find a whole list of things that disprove it. For example, oldest human fossil found outside of Africa throws the popular theory into doubt. Skull found in China could rewrite all out of Africa theory of human evolution. Jawbone discovery challenges out of Africa model. Before the discovery, the earliest evidence of humans outside Africa dated the mycelia cave jaw provides evidence to disprove this theory, the out of Africa theory, that is. So, and then there's another one, is the out of Africa theory dead? Well, it is, and it's been dead for ages. Now, there's recent discoveries in Australia that have actually completely debunked the out of Africa theory and blown it out of the water for good. And this is where the people who actually invented the out of Africa theory said, well, it's more likely that life came out of Australia 400,000 years ago. But none of this makes it into the dull and repetitive world of the academic, who are these people are constantly striving to make history fit their own narrative. So this is really a part of the whole issue that we talk about, whether it's climate change, whether it's the history of the human race, whether it's anything that you read. And I think we do have a very discerning kind of audience that listens to Windows on the World. And what we get, even in the so-called alternative media, is people jumping on basically alternative populist themes. In other words, they repeat the same old things that the others are repeating, and then they start to sound just as bad as academics, and even worse in some respects, because they haven't done any actual real research into what they're talking about. So, yeah, it says here, a piece of skull found in Greece is the oldest human fossil outside Africa. Well, actually, it's not, but they don't want to look at anything else. And so we have the Denisovians that were found in Siberia, and evidence from multiple sources, which we have covered extensively on the shows previously, and we will continue to do so. Now, these recently discovered skeletons in Australia have had no publicity outside of ForgottenOrigin.com, which is Stephen and Evan Strong in Australia. And even though there were people from the Australian government present who are actually there to control the historical narrative, nothing of it was being reported by them because it doesn't fit. Now, one of these skulls had huge eye sockets, no forehead, and a large receding cranium. The features specific to this Australian skull, it's a totally weird skull. It's got massive eye sockets. It's much thicker bone. And this is another thing about these skulls, which they find. And you can look at the Paracas people of Peru. They go back about 2,000 years. They have much bigger eye sockets and generally thicker bone. So what we have as far as evolution, this theory of evolution, is a Homo sapiens that's weaker and less adapted to its environment than previous incarnations. And that's according to this kind of historical narrative of evolution. But basically, it's not a sapien or a Neanderthal, this skull that they found in Australia, or it's not a Denisovan either. And it has 2 skull sutures, not 3, as in Homo sapiens. So it's a different species. So there are other theories which put Europe in the picture. In other words, they don't know. And anything found outside of the out of Africa theory is ignored or basically just glued into it. So that's just a quick snapshot of this out of Africa and evolution pantomime. But the biggest one, of course, is the weather and the climate emergency. This is the meme of the times. So this week we're going to look at the climate emergency. Not the one for the terminally hard of thinking, but the one that is coming and the reasons why the current climate predictions will be turned on their head very soon. Now, first, I want to read this article out. Now, bearing in mind, this is from a major UK newspaper, and I'm not going to give you the name of the newspaper until I've read this article. So try and guess which newspaper this came from in 1962. Right? Now, here we go. I'm just going to scroll down to it. It's from the archive, 12th of June 1962, The Ice Age Cometh was the title. It says here, as glaciers start to advance again, evidence suggests that the Earth may be entering a new ice age. Well, that was only in 1962. The reappearance of the sun has not done everything to restore people's faith in the constancy of climate. During the several weeks when it seemed as if winter would not give way to spring, let alone summer, it was only natural to wonder whether some permanent change had taken place in the world's climate. Now that it seems there will be summer after all, the sense of insecurity irrationally remains. Is there some great change of climate underway, it says? The answer, as it turns out, is most probably that there is. As evidence of climate in prehistory is accumulated, it becomes more and more evident that slow changes are continually taking place. Not merely was there an ice age nearly 11,000 years ago, on several occasions in the 1880s and 1890s, the Thames froze during winters colder than in any recent memory. The river was still more thickly covered with ice in the 17th century. In 1680, there were 11 inches of ice on the Thames. The chances are that these continual processes of change, which have taken place in the last several thousand years, are even now working in one way or another on the world's climate. The proposition is not in dispute. It says to know what changes may be underway at the moment is more difficult. There are some signs that the gradual warming up of the atmosphere, which marked the first half of this century, may have come to an end with the Second World War, and that a slow decline of temperature may then have taken over. It is not exceptional for the average annual temperatures to vary by several degrees centigrade from one year to another. One year may be hot and the next may be cold, and there is apparently no more pattern in the variations than in the results of tossing a succession of pennies. Only the comparison of these fluctuations over a period of decades will show accurately the slow changes in climate. The average temperatures of the northern hemisphere increased by something like half a degree centigrade during the century starting in 1840. For most of this interval, the average warming of the atmosphere brought about the retreat of glaciers in northern Europe and the melting of the ice in the Arctic. As yet, the signs are inconclusive that the warming tendency of the last century has now come to an end, though evidence is accumulating to support this conclusion. The retreat of some glaciers in North America and in Switzerland and Scandinavia appears to have halted. Elsewhere, some glaciers are actually advancing, while others continue to retreat, which is what they're doing now. Given the lack of systematic records of a typical collection of glaciers and some understanding of how their length should vary with climate, it is hard to rely on evidence like this. Well, this shows how open and more honest the approach was in 1962. And what's happened since? Well, an agenda's happened since. An agenda to pin climate change on taxation and the control of all assets in the world. Let's get back to this and just finish it off. But support, it says here, is also provided by the collection of statistics about temperature and rainfall, incomplete though these are. The signs are that the decades to come will see a halt to the warming process or even see it reversed. Now, that's from the Guardian newspaper in 1962. So the climate alarmism and the recent announced emergency, along with the Guardian's rebranding of language to suit the scaremongering narrative, has all happened very recently. So, when looking at the evidence of this falsified climate data, the fraud of increasing global temperatures, and the appalling standard of weather station data recently revealed in response to the latest UN IPCC report, that's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report of weather stations, some of which had closed down, but still somehow and fraudulently produced data. And they're also recording data on weather stations which used to be in the country, but are now set in concrete in cities, creating an upward trend, along with the recent fraud of up to 2.5 degrees added to global temperatures by NASA and NOAA, that's NOAA in North America. So, who could forget the already known ClimateGate emails from the Hadley Centre at University of East Anglia? It's clear that the post-truth world has nothing to do with presenting facts. Well, The Guardian, along with many others. So, let's now look at some real historical data and predictions which have proved accurate over hundreds of years and indicate that we are or possibly are going into a climate emergency, and one which will potentially kill off a huge potential of the population, and one which no government has publicly prepared for. The focus on the global warming issue is the key to hiding the real facts that the world's population will not be reduced by a warming planet, but something much, much worse. Now, I'm going to introduce Sandy Adams to talk about the main theme of the show here, the return of the hunger stones. Now, this is fascinating historical evidence which has appeared in the Elbe River in the Czech Republic. And these stones go back to the 1600s, and whenever they've appeared in rivers, there has been real problems, real climate change, and crops failing, and global weather patterns getting colder. And also they coincide, interestingly, with a rise in volcanic eruptions. So, Sandy, you've been looking into this today, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I mean, it's really quite fascinating. These stones have laid underneath the water in Europe, in the Czech Republic, and it's along this stretch of river called the Elbe, which goes really from Czech Republic to Germany. And as the Europe has had a period of very hot weather and drought, there's no doubt about that. But it's nothing to do with CO2, and it's nothing to do with us driving around in our cars, because this has been going on, as the hunger stones can prove, for hundreds and hundreds of years, that these stones have revealed themselves because of the water level in the river. What's happened is that during the hunger periods, which were the drought periods, people etched onto the stones the dates of the droughts and how the droughts affected the crops. And these stones have suddenly appeared again in the river. There's 12 of them, and they're along this river. And it really shows the swings of extreme heat that happened throughout the centuries. And basically, they've gone from the hunger stones from 1616. There's 12 along the river, and they started in 1417. These are the hunger stones. What's been carved into them? The dates: 1417. 1616, 1707, 1746, 1790, 1800, 1811 and 1830. And then there was also a period of warming, 1868 to 1892 to 93. So that covers a period of about 476 years. So that's way before we were pumping out CO2. Well, we're not pumping out CO2.
I'll interject here. So we've got in the chat box, Martin has said, I have a book on the history of the Isle of Man, and that says that the late Bronze Age was warmer than now too.
Yes.
Also, a few other comments. There have certainly been lots of earthquakes in the last few weeks, and a big one in northwest Australia today. So that's thanks to Martin and Monthly Blimpton in chat there, and hello to Angie. So yeah, carry on, Sandy.
Yeah. It's really great. We've got people responding. I think that's marvellous. So what happens according to these weather patterns that we have? So we have extreme periods of extreme cold, and then we go usually back to back with periods of extreme warmth and drought, back to back with periods of extreme cold. And someone's done the science on this, and this was actually in, I can't remember, what was the article? I can't remember what
The article I've got is from ArmstrongEconomics.com.
Yeah, that's it.
It came out actually about a year ago. This thing about the hunger stones, we covered it 18 months ago.
Yeah.
But it's actually become very relevant because more has been put out about it. And if you go to this article at Armstrong Economics, you will actually find that it's got a photograph of these stones, and they're ancient, really. I mean, it's got 1616 on it, and 1842, 1921, and it's all been etched in these stones, these 12 stones that are found in the River Elbe in Desin in Czechoslovakia. And these were historic measurements that have been put there, so they're a bit more representative of what's happening than the models and projections of the so-called scientists of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, because this is actually documenting historical events.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting how this is all coming out now, that we appear to be going into a grand solar minimum, which we'll talk about. I mean, Piers has been talking about it for a long time.
That's Piers Corbyn.
Yeah. And, I've only really sort of got into this just recently, have been looking at it in more depth, simply because, I mean, there's another thing where there's a woman who is a fantastic scientist, and she her name is what's her name? I've got her name here. Bear with me. Valentino Zarkova, and she's written a book, funny enough, in Nature magazine, which has just written that thing on the skulls, which you mentioned earlier. But she's just had this article written, and it's called The Oscillation of the Baseline of Solar Magnetic Field and Solar Irradiance on a Millennial Timescale. Now, it's a very, very long and scientific title, but she really goes into this whole thing about, and it's been accepted by Nature magazine, which is quite mainstream really, and quite they're sticking their necks out a bit. But she talks about the medieval warm period from 900 to 1200 to 1200, and then the water minimums. And all these hot periods and cool periods are all historically based. And you can evidence them, and they usually correlate with crop failures and famines and basically, kind of political unrest as well, wars. It all kinds of fits in with wars and things.
Yes.
So,
The droughts that have been recorded on the stones, actually, I'll just reiterate this, date from 1417, 1616, 1707, 1746, 1790, 1800, 1811, 1830, 1842, 1868, 1892 and 1893, which covers a period of 476 years. Now, it says here this produces an average of 39.6 years between each one. Just applying that average would bring you to 2012. However, we have to look closer. Note that 2 years, 1892 and 1893, are back to back. This does not reflect two separate droughts, but the peak in intensity. Instead of there being two separate droughts, it is just the same event extended. Now that means there were really 11 events within the 476-year span of history indicated on these stones. And lo and behold, this alters the average to 43.27 years. Now, this actually conforms to our economic confidence model frequency of 8.6 years, it says here.
That's the pi frequency.
Yes, the pi frequency. Yeah. In fact, it says here, there is additional evidence that is being ignored by the global warming crowd, who seem intent upon leading society to its doom by ignoring the past entirely. Extensive research has also been done on tree rings in north-central Europe. This study has discovered that there has been a pattern of mega droughts in the 15th through to the 19th centuries. They classified 1893 as the Great Drought of 1893, where rainfall decline was between 30 to 90% throughout various regions in Europe. They also found that the Irish famine of 1740 to 1741 was the result of a cooling period, they pointed out, resulted in unusually low winter and spring temperatures in 1740 that produced crop failures and a massive subsequent famine. They point out that there were 5 major mega droughts that took place in 1540, 1590, 1616, 1718 and 1719. Once again, it says here we see the back-to-back events in 1718 to 1719, which in our analysis reflect a build-up in intensity rather than the 2 separate events. Reducing this to 4 events, once again, gives us an average of 44.75 years, which is very close to the pi frequency. If we plot this series out, we arrive at 2020, which was when it would be starting.
And we have had, this scientist, Zarkova, she also has said that there'll be a significant warming period until 2020, at which time it will start to cool very rapidly, so that we will be seeing cooling temperatures, particularly in the northern hemisphere, in sort of Europe. But there's pockets, always with this, it's a phenomenon that you will get pockets of warmth in places. And in the last cooling period that we had, areas that you wouldn't have thought would get warm, like Alaska, got warm. So it doesn't actually fit a pattern. So in a way, it's interesting that it turned from global warming to climate change. In my opinion, all governments know about this because it's so obvious. The science is there. Governments know about this. They don't want us to know about it. And they're piggybacking on the natural cycles of the planet. And because we have these natural cycles, they will piggyback on that and make profit on it, like, telling us that it's all CO2, which is exactly what's happening. And that's the scary bit, in my opinion. And we've got various sort of bits of information here that I've just been listening to a chap called David Dubine, who has written a book, and it's called the Climate Revolution, and it's by him and a guy called Bill and Richard, the 2 guys called Bill and Richard Porter, and they've been doing a lot of research into how the climate will actually pan out in the next few years, and we've got possibly about 50 years of global cooling all over the planet. And this could, this is already surfacing as we've had a lot of flooding in areas that you wouldn't think would flood, like in Australia, places like Ayers Rock. The desert around Ayers Rock has become a field. And we're getting all these anomalies with climate that is directly responsible from the fact that the sun has been so quiet. And we've got this very, very quiet sun, which affects our Earth. And to put it into perspective, he actually had this diagram of the sun, which is huge, obviously. And the Earth is so tiny, and to say that the Earth isn't affected by the sun, and that it's actually the humans that affect it is nonsense, isn't it? I mean, any idiot could see that.
Yeah, we've been reporting on this for years, and we also did a show called The Mini Ice Ages here, and you can find that on YouTube. That's about 60 or 70,000 hits now. But what people don't get is the propaganda behind this, and this is where they have this kind of cognitive dissonance going on, or basically they lapse into disbelief because they don't know what the programme's actually about. Now, if there was a real climate emergency, you can bet that no government in the world would be disclosing it to the public. The only reason they want the public to think there's a climate emergency is because of the agenda of control and taxation and basically the monitoring of all population and putting everyone into smart cities by 2050, which is the UN Global Action Plan. I was looking at a book that Sandy refers to today as a little bit of a digression called Our Common Future. And it was basically the blueprint for what's called sustainable development, which is where the climate change agenda actually came from. It says here, and this is in one of the opening pages in this book, which was put together, the forward of it was put together by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was she was the Prime Minister of Sweden, wasn't she?
No, Norway.
Norway, that's it, right. So, okay. So it says here, the UN Environmental Programme, UNEP, should be strengthened as the principal source on environmental data. Now, this is why you don't get any competing narrative, because the UN set out to control the narrative on the climate through the UN IPCC, the lobbying body for the UN, which is, of course, the origin of 97% of scientists agree. Well, no, it's 97% of our bought and paid for scientists appear to agree. So it carries on. So as the principal source on environmental data, assessment and reporting, and as the principal advocate and agent for change and international cooperation on critical environment and natural resource protection issues. That says it all. That's called controlling the narrative of public opinion and controlling the global narrative of public opinion as a political agenda. So now we can get back to what this is really about, the real climate emergency that will never be revealed to the public, because if it was really going to be a climate emergency of global warming, then we wouldn't be told about it. The reason we're not going to be told about the hunger stones is it's not in the public interest for them to know that hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of them are going to die of hunger in the next 10 to 15 years. That's actually not in the public interest. It's not in the public interest to know about anything that's going to worry them. That's the point I wanted to make there.
Keep watching telly. Yeah, keep watching Love Island. And it's going to be a period. We're coming up to a period of enormous distraction, because the governments do not want us to know this. They don't want us to know it. And I'd urge you to go on to David Devine's website and look at, or just Google the climate revolution and take a read of it, because he's got some very good information there. He did speak at AV10 this year, and he's got some very interesting information, and he's done the science on it as well. And he actually started off as a coffee buyer. He was a coffee merchant, and he used to buy coffee from this place in Burma. And he noticed I think it was in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, that the coffee crops were failing. And he was a global warmist. He believed it hook, line, and sinker. But he was going over to Burma to his plantations. He was a bit like the man from Del Monte, but he was looking at coffee beans, and he realised that the coffee plants were failing. And he talked to the growers, to the farmers, and they said, well, we're having to put the seedlings now under polytunnels, and we've had to cover them with insulation because it's got so cold. And he then started going into the science of it and realised about these enormous cycles. And then he's employed scientists to give him all the information. And it really is a problem. The food shortages, he claims, are going to be really extreme. And we've got to really think about how we create our food. It could be aquaponics, it could be hydroponics, there is the science available for us to get over this, but we need time, and we've only got apparently from now, really, 2025, we're going to be in it. This very, very cold period. So, and he does, if you look at his website, just Google David Dubine, Dubyne, and he actually has loads and loads of information about how to grow stuff, which is really, really useful at times like this. I mean, either move to somewhere that is likely to be warmer, or stay where you are and really get together. But we all need to really pull together on this, because this is the real climate emergency. While they've got some fictitious climate emergency happening over there and distracting you, you're not looking at the real one. So that's really what I feel is happening, don't you, Mark?
Yes, absolutely. And it's really bad news for the Green Deal this week, because that was exposed for what it is. Yes, it's a corporate agenda. I'd just like to actually reiterate some of this stuff from our common future, because I think it dovetails quite nicely into this as a reason to ignore what the UN IPCC are actually saying. It says the capacity to identify, assess and report on rises of irreversible damage to ecosystems and threats to the survival, security and well-being of the world community must be rapidly reinforced and extended. Remember, this was 1987 this came out, so it's a result of several years' work before then. Governments, individually and collectively, have the principal responsibility to do this. The UN are telling governments that they have to do this. The UNEP's Earthwatch programme should be the centre of leadership to the UN system on risk assessment. A new international programme for cooperation among largely non-governmental organisations, the scourge of the planet, NGOs, scientific bodies, it says here, laughably, and industry groups, more particularly, should therefore be established for this purpose. Now, this is telling you exactly how they set about to do it, informing the public through non-government organisations, their fake scientific community, and of course industry, which is what it's all about. And remember, all of this came out of the Rio Earth Summit in 92 and was reinforced in 2002 because nobody really wanted to take it up. A few countries had signed up to it, but now the whole thing is a massive corporate agenda and nothing else, which brings us on to more natural disasters such as volcanoes. Now, this is also a part of what's revealed in the Hunger Stones. It says here, it appears that instead of a back-to-back event in 2019, this could become the worst period of intensity and produce 3 years of drought way past 2020. The greater the number of volcanoes erupting can also produce an increase in intensity for this period. It says what we must be concerned about is volcanic activity appearing in places like the West Indies, and it's the stratovolcano type that can change the weather. And then we look at the Yellowstone Volcano, which could be erupting in the very near future. And this was an update. This was from 2018. It said volcano erupting in the future could have cataclysmic consequences for the United States. But will the supervolcano erupt anytime soon? Well, we don't know. But what these Hunger Stones seem to say is that these volcanic eruptions do coincide with these periods of heat and then extreme cold. Have you got any more on that, Sandy?
Well, there was an interesting one. There was a volcano that went off in Europe. In Asia, and it was in the Dutch East Indies in 1815, and it was Mount Tambora, and it was the largest eruption for 1,300 years. Now, it caused what is known as the year without summer in 1816. Because it blocked out the sun, and it actually snowed in New York City in July. So you don't find that being brought up anywhere, do you?
No.
I'd never heard of it.
No, it says here Yellowstone erupting could further extend beyond the US, affecting climates on a global scale.
Yeah.
These are volcanoes that are known as composite volcano, which is a conical volcano built up by many layers of strata or hardened lava. When they erupt, this sends a tremendous amount of material into the atmosphere, which reduces sunlight and cools temperatures. It goes into some more technical data there. But if you look up the article on Armstrong Economics, you'll find it. Just Google, or your search engine of choice. Don't use Google. I wouldn't recommend it. But
yes.
Well, I suppose they all have to go through it nowadays, don't they? Yandex is a Russian one, isn't it?
But
don't use that.
DuckDuckGo's good, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. But it does say, Wikipedia do say that, even RT is funded by the Russian government. So you can't have anything to do with Russia because our own government has told us not to, when we've reported on that as well.
Oh, gosh,
Who do you believe these days? Certainly not the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, who put all this crap out on behalf of our current government, whoever they are. And anybody who thinks that it's going to matter whether Boris Johnson becomes a leader of a party or this other idiot or some other idiot or some other idiot, then think again. It's got nothing to do with national government.
It's they're all being told what to do by the deep state or whoever is in charge. We don't know who is.
Ask Boris Johnson if he knows anything about the Hunger Stones next time you see him. Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, or Jeremy Corbyn. But there was another one that went, wasn't it, in Krakatoa? There was a big the Krakatoa in Indonesia in 1875, and that also caused massive cold and famine in Indonesia, in sort of around Java. So these events, and Piers Corbyn would be able to explain it to us, but it's all to do with electricity, isn't it? It's the electric universe and all the solar winds that come from the fact that the sun, if it does put out a solar mass ejection, once it's been really quiet, it destabilizes. It sends all this energy that creates all these volcanoes, doesn't it? I mean, I don't understand it myself.
And we're talking about massively forceful powers of nature here. This is way beyond what the brain cells of these idiots who are spouting on about a climate emergency could even comprehend, let alone look into. But I mean, there's been loads of these eruptions. In 1815, Mount Tambora, which produced a year without a summer in 1816. There was the period climatologists call the Little Ice Age. They believe took place starting around 1650. We've covered this. This was a result of primarily the decline in the energy output of the sun, which we're going through now, reflected in the drastic decline in sunspot activity. It says what we are looking at here is a drastic correction in market terminology, which took place during the 1800s. A study of Greenland and Antarctic ice cores in the 1990s revealed evidence that pointed to a massive volcanic eruption that had occurred in early 1809. The problem that everyone faced was there were no human records of such an event. This meant that it must have been in a region where humans did not record the event. Additional research revealed from tree ring data that there was also a major eruption in 1808. Now, two independent sources were pointing to a mystery eruption, but where? Carries on. The mystery was simply that such a catastrophic eruption of that magnitude should have been noticed by someone. They began to scour the records around the world, hoping that someone somewhere recorded the event. Finally, in 2014, a PhD student, Alvaro Guevara Muro, and Dr. Caroline Williams of the University of Bristol discovered an account of atmospheric events consistent with such an event by Colombian scientists Francisco Jose de Caldas, who recorded a massive transparent cloud that obstructed the sunlight at Bogota, Colombia in early 1809. Further investigation revealed that the cloud was first observed by him on December the 11th, 1808. De Caldas reported conditions consistent with a volcanic cloud that altered the weather, turning it unusually cold with even bitter frosts in Colombia. You see, so this can happen anytime, anywhere that's got a volcano. And when you start looking at torrid meteor showers and even comets, these are catastrophic events that will change the weather systems on the planet for many, many years. And none of this is taken into consideration by the Muppets at the IPCC because it's too frightening and it doesn't fit into academia, because they go for the model of uniformitarianism versus our version, which is actually catastrophism. In other words, that catastrophes have completely changed the earth over millions of years, and all the evidence is there, yet they want to go for uniformitarianism because it fits in with Darwinism and social Darwinism and their paychecks. Academics cannot be trusted on these issues because of the circumstances of their employment and how they are mentored into propaganda.
And also the money that is being generated through this nonsense about anthropogenic global warming with the carbon nonsense. They're making too much money, but that will mean nothing if we have these catastrophic events and if we have famines which have happened throughout history because of ups and downs in the graph of global temperature.
Yeah, and this is another reason why they want everybody in cities, because they don't want pockets of people to be able to survive on their own. That's the whole point, that you have to be at the mercy of the global governance, which is the UN IPCC. And I think we'll also cover this book properly, this Our Common Future, because I'd actually never read it. Sandy read it years ago, but I just looked through it this morning, and what they're telling you is this is a totalitarian system. They're telling you there is nothing outside this system which we're going to take any notice of. And newsflash, let's move forward from 1987 to now. That's exactly what's happened.
It is extraordinary, really, when you look at the plan. Because again, this was a Club of Rome think tank. And it's all comes out of the Club of Rome. The first global revolution came after this one, and it's all a plan. It's a plan in black and white of total control of the human population globally. And that's exactly what it's doing. And they know what's coming, but they're feeding us this narrative so that we just comply. And we won't be able to grow anything because we'll be in a concrete city with with mass surveillance. They're not going to leave us in the country where we can do something about it.
Well, that's exactly it. And what I've seen and reported on for the past 10 years has absolutely proved that. That's why I moved out of London, because I saw it being turned into a concentration camp, borough by borough, which it has been. And there's going to be no way out. And that's the point. And that's what the whole thing's really about, is control and management of global population. But at the very centre of this is population reduction. That's clearly stated in the opening chapters of this book, Our Common Future. And of course, we jump in then to the sustainable development plans that went into every council in the UK and indeed around the world, and they are implementing exactly these policies. So the useful idiots in your local council don't know anything about this,
No.
They don't want to know anything about this, and there's actually no point in engaging with them because they are beyond stupid. They are paid useful idiots. They're only useful as long as they're there and as long as they're enforcing the agenda on the general public, which is the puppet masters behind the scenes are enforcing them. And these people are just like academics. They want to think that their voices are important, and when they get up they sound important, but nothing comes out. So we've reported on this over the last few weeks, and people are going on and on now about the 5G agenda. It's got nothing to do with your local council. Your local council won't stop it. You might be able to stop it, but they certainly won't. And all this grandstanding and nonsense that's being put about we're going to stop this and we're going to stop that. Newsflash, I'm sorry to inform you, I'm here to tell you, no, you're not. Not at that level, it won't happen. And I know this because I've taken councils to court, I know exactly how they operate, and I know exactly what this plan is, as does Sandy, which is why we talk about it in our talks, the bigger picture. I would recommend, though, looking at this article because it goes into a lot of volcanic eruptions and even really extreme things that go back into the Bible, like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's all there in the climate record, and you can look it up. But therefore, why are we listening to the UN IPCC with their models and projections, none of which have ever come true, and which are clearly political in nature? So that's the main issue, really, that when you start looking at this stuff and do some research, you can easily find the information. And that's the same with anything. And this is why we've got this, this whole alternative media is full of people who are just narcissists who want their voices to be heard above everybody else. It's a shouting match, and who shouts the loudest and is there every day, broadcasting nonsense and basically putting out headline grabbing fake news, which is what they do most of the time. This is what's drawing the attention of people. So we've got the alternative media, which is no better than the mainstream media. I wouldn't say we're either alternative or mainstream. We do our own thing, and I don't depend on anybody. I don't jump into all of these kind of fashions that go on where everyone's going to talk about a certain thing, and it's almost like I've got a new album out, so I'm going to talk about every track on it, and that's a bit like what this sort of truth thing has turned into. So people get into these memes, and they're being steered into it. They're being steered into it just as they're being steered into BBC News. So all this stuff is really easy to find as well. That's my point, I think, is that none of this stuff is hard to find. You can just look it up. It's at your fingertips. And then you get ththese idiots going on that, it's a conspiracy theory, because they've been told two words, conspiracy and theory, to repeat, And we just cover this stuff every week, but we haven't got time to go into all this stuff in Mesopotamia, and goes back to Roman times. They've got dates and dates and dates, like the 1815 eruption of Krakatoa and all this stuff, and 1883 it erupted again, and basically loads of dates after dates after dates going back to Flavius Magnus Aurelius, the Roman statesman and historian. He wrote of this period 485 to 585. The sun seems to have lost its wonted light and appears of a bluish colour. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon, to feel the mighty vigour of the sun's heat wasted into feebleness, and the phenomena which accompany an eclipse prolonged throughout almost a whole year. We have had a summer without heat, the crops have been chilled by north winds, the rain is denied. So basically, all this stuff is there in a historical record, and all this you have to do is look at it. In fact, all of this stuff is in an article with dates and times and sources, and all you have to do is put it in to your favourite search engine and it all comes up. So nobody out there has got any excuse to not look at the real causes of climate change.
Yes, indeed. And I'm going to give you a couple more dates.
Yes.
You've got the medieval warm period, which was from 900 to 1200. The Maundam minimum, which was from 1645 to 1715. The Wolf minimum, 1300 to 1350. The Ort minimum, from 1000 to 1050. The Roman warm period from 400 to 150 BC. And the Homer minimum from 800 to 900 BC. Those are all, you can look all of those up, and it really does seem that it's a back-to-back thing. So you get a period of the temperature goes up and up and up and up, and then it comes down and down and down and down. And it's not rocket science. Everything does that. What comes up must come down. Don't you agree?
Absolutely.
And so and the trouble is that the climate people, the climate change lot, are looking at
lobbyists.
Lobbyists they're not looking at a tiny piece of the graph. Literally, they're looking at a sliver of the graph that is literally 4,000, years of ups and downs. If you see what I mean. And so, they're just using that as propaganda, basically, aren't they? Because they're just using that tiny little bit of that graph, which saw it climbing. And as we know, if you look at in your Google search or your whatever search you use, look at the ClimateGate stuff, because that's really interesting, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And we've got quote after quote after quote from the UNIPCC and all of their lobbyists and so-called scientists who are saying that they're going to skew the data to fit what they want, because it's not about an environmental program. It's actually a program which is to take over the environment. Yeah. It's nothing to do with environmentalism. It's about the taking over of assets. That's all it is. And you're an asset. Your energy is an asset, listener out there. That's what they want to do, is take your energy, drain all your surplus energy into directions which are useless, which is like Extinction Rebellion or your local council meeting. It doesn't matter what it is. They're all useless. They're not going to get you anywhere, to stop you actually taking action yourself. Because when you use natural law and start observing how things really are, things start to change. I mean, we've got in... this article is absolutely fantastic. It's got Tunguska, it's got things about meteor storms. The Chinese historical records from 540 AD describe dragons fought in the pond of Kuho. They went westward in the places they passed. All trees were broken. Ice core samples also contain extraterrestrial dust from this period as well. It is argued that a larger meteor struck the Earth about this time, and this is what is described as dragons fighting in the sky, which takes us into comets. If a comet hits this planet, it's game over. That's it. If we have a comet that's more than a mile wide that hits the planet...
Mark. It's a bit negative, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I mean, we
if
let's look. Let's finish the show on a bit of a high. Yesterday we had our first ever Unicorn Saturday. Okay, so we named Saturday Unicorn Saturday because we have to have something fluffy and mythical to take us away from all this negativity. Because we're in a little pocket of the world here where people do that. So we thought we'd do that, and then by 11 o'clock we thought, no, this is bollocks. I want to go back to reality.
Yeah, there's only so much kind of distraction you can take before. Well, when you've got a mind like mine, I think, and Mark's and all of us who actually do look at deep, dark stuff, and we do.
Well, it's just reality.
It's reality.
Neither dark or light.
Life. Yeah.
This is the problem that people have.
Yeah.
They judge things as positive and negative. Some things have a negative effect on you. In fact, a lot of things that have happened to me over the past 5 years have definitely had a negative effect on me. But the point is that that I wouldn't have it any other way, because I don't want to bury my head and become a hedonist and try and turn away from anything that's reality, because the idea is that when you leave this planet, you leave it with a bit more information than when you arrived on it. And most people leave this planet with about the same amount of information in their heads as when they arrived on it, because they don't know anything about the bigger picture of things. You have to be able to put this stuff together. And yeah, we need minds like yours, listener. So all of our international viewers, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We've had a bit of a rant on here tonight.
Oh, are you going to mention your friends in Bulgaria?
Yes, then in Bulgaria.
Yes, hello,
and,
Bulgaria.
Roy in the Philippines as well. He's always
Fantastic.
listening.
Hello, Roy.
Yeah, we have people all over the world, actually. I can't name them all now because they are too numerous to mention. But thanks to anyone who's made a little donation to Windows on the World recently. It's much appreciated and we know who you are. And it really does help to get about because this platform is starting to build and it's building from a very good place because we're not covering the conspiracy theory trash, the clickbait nonsense, which generally brings the punters in. So we have a very strong and loyal audience of people who send in real evidence. So thanks for that because we're not part of what's known as the truth or industrial complex. We're nothing to do with it. We're mainly an outlet for information and really interesting information and an archive of stuff which even amazes me, the stuff that we've put in there. It's like a library and there's so much information in there. And that information has been gleaned by going to real primary sources and disseminating it properly. In other words, we're not looking for clickbait headlines and we're not looking for people who are going to amaze us with their fantasy stories. That's really why one of the reasons I've stopped doing interviews, not because there's not credible people out there to interview, of course there is, but because there's so much information that comes through our listeners every week that there's no need to have guests on because we need to actually compress the data now. And that's why I think the shows are so important. And do book the bigger picture. I've got to apologise to people in Lytham St Anne's. I actually injured my leg, so I won't be able to go up there this Monday, and I'm going to reschedule that. But that talk on natural law is going to happen. And of course, we're at the Glastonbury Symposium, myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy, on the 28th and 29th of this month. Do turn up. It's in Glastonbury.
On the 28th, actually, I won't be there because I've got to be in Totnes. I'll be doing a talk in Totnes. And we're having a live link with Rosa Corey from America, who's a fantastic woman who's pioneered the truth about Agenda 21 in the United States. And so I'll be there, but I will be at the Glastonbury Symposium the following day.
On the Sunday.
On Sunday.
So I think I'm on the Saturday and Piers is on the Sunday.
Yeah.
So do book tickets for that because we do need support because in actual fact, the environs of Glastonbury are very fluffy unicorn, but there are people there who aren't fluffy unicorns and I'm sure that they will attend.
They will, I'm sure. But fluffy unicorns are welcome.
They are because we had a fluffy
inclusive.
Unicorn day yesterday.
Yes, we have to be inclusive. Just to let you know, the event in Totnes is at the Seven Stars Hotel. I believe it's an evening event. I think it's in the evening at 7:30. But the information about that will come out. We'll put it on Windows on the World.
And just as a little post-it note from today's show, meteorite impacts are by far among the most destructive forces in the solar system. So look up meteorite impacts, look up volcanoes, and look up all this article. Actually, it's on Armstrong. What was it called? It was on Armstrong. Hang on.
Armstrong.
Yeah, because I've got loads of things in the way of it now. So it goes back to ArmstrongEconomics.com.
Yeah.
International news.
Very good website. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see an actual photograph of the hunger stones found in the Elbe River in Czechoslovakia.
But don't have nightmares.
That's right. Everybody, remember. There's a fluffy unicorn for you out there somewhere.
Yes.
Until next week, that's it from Windows on the World, from myself and Sandy Adams. And we'll see you 9 p.m. next week. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.